So that might help perhaps illuminate my particular perspective as to why I think it's important that we reduce suffering. And again, I want to make also one thing clear today is many of you are going to leave here thinking that you now know what transhumanism is. I don't think you probably have. You've heard George Dvorsky's interpretation of transhumanism. I put forth my own particular vision and my own particular ideas. And every transhumanism is going to have a different opinion. In fact, if you had a room of transhumanists together, you'd probably get one hell of an argument. Whether it be it talks about the nature of human suffering and all those sorts of issues, and even issues as they pertain to long-term probability prospects and so forth. But I personally, I don't necessarily buy the idea that it is only through our stress and suffering that we find value and meaning in life. I actually think that's a myth.
But, okay, but how do you know if something is good or if something is bad? If, say, you only experienced good things, right? Like, say you experience everything is exactly the same, okay?
So well, I think these are objective things. I think that pain is as objective as it gets. You know you're experiencing, well, there's gradations of subjectivity within pain, but the pain itself is an objective concept.
But speaking with life, I mean, that's not, I guess you could argue it's objective, but let's just say it's not. Yeah. You know, it's either there or it isn't.
I think ultimately what we're arguing now is meaning of life issues. And that's obviously a huge topic that, you know, I'm not sure I can really engage in that right now in front of the podium, but I think ultimately that's what you're getting at. And I think that's let's just say that that's something we can continue to discuss and debate and figure out each for ourselves what it is that our true meaning and purpose is in life. And for some of us, it may mean the abolition of suffering. For some, maybe, you know what? And again, I'm not imposing a vision on everybody. I'm just promoting an idea here of things you might want for yourself and for your family. And if you feel that an 80 to 100 year lifespan is enough for you, well then, who's to say that that's wrong? I personally think that it might be a bit misguided. You might want to reconsider your decision, but ultimately it's your choice. Similarly, if you wish to live a life in which there's a dramatic alleviation of stress and suffering, perhaps to the point where it's non-existent, again, I think that's a personal decision. And that there is no all-encompassing meaning of life that we can apply to all human beings, that it very much comes down to an individual perspective, an individual set of values. Oh, but you know what? I think I'm skirting your issue, because you're actually asking me an issue of relativity, and that is given the absence of any kind of subjectivity when it comes to suffering, how could we actually tell what's good, bad, evil, right, wrong? And I think that those are very much. You know, I think that I would like to think that our ethics and our morals is actually driven by reason and logic, rather than how it's driven by emotions and sensation and our subjectivity. That issues of repugnance, and again, I'll make another reference to Leon Kass. His big thing was the wisdom of repugnance. He said, you know how we know something is morally wrong? If we feel disgusted by it.
Yeah, the yuck factor.
The yuck factor ethics, as it's been dubbed, and it's considered the laughingstock amongst mainstream and academic bioethicists. That's no way to provide us with a moral compass. That what we considered repugnant and disgusting in the past, whether it be homosexuality or other sorts of social mores, coffee?
Disgusting. Disgusting.
That it's in no way, shape, or form something that should inform us. That what we are moving less and less from is our gut feeling that something's right or wrong, to actually, how does this actually logically amount to issues of social justice, to democratic rights and freedoms, to individual expression, to one particular group not discriminating against another particular group, and so on. I think that ultimately we can kind of come up with an objective sense of right, wrong, good and bad, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that was a very difficult question. Wow.
When it comes down to it, aren't you arguing against the laws of thermodynamics? Like, all processes that begin have to end, and saying that life doesn't, like, where is there any example or any basis that a process that begins doesn't have to end, what goes up doesn't have to come down? Like, there's an entire group that emerged over this idea. What you're talking about is entropy, that eventually the universe is heading for a bad end, and I don't think... that's not what she's arguing?
We can talk about that later.
Well, what's created and composed together has to eventually come apart and become simple again.
Because the universe has its own entropy, and the planet Earth has its own entropy as well, that eventually all energy that this Earth can give will be exhausted. And, sorry, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
No, I'm just saying, is there any examples of, like, any kind of logical equivalent to something that begins, like life begins, it's not always there. that stuff that is created and begins can remain that way forever and not dissipate?
Are there any examples in nature of immortality, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Classic car.
Classic car.
There's
I like that
If
one,
someone wants to
actually.
keep up with it and rust-proof and recognizes all the things that degenerate that system, and they just proactively deal with that, then you can have a classic car last
That's
forever.
extending it. Not
Won't be able to fuel it
It's
for 20
it's
years.
extending it indefinitely.
Yeah. I think as long as you, I think Peacefire's point is well taken, as long as you maintain something and continually add on and fix what's broken, then you can have something that lives on in perpetuity. By the way, there are examples in biology, though. I believe we do have immortal cells in our body that we pass down through our reproduction from one generation to the next. Sorry?
Cancer cells are immortal.
Cancer cells are immortal?
There's a species of jellyfish that's immortal.
I'm sorry?
There's a species of jellyfish that goes from being sexually mature to being sexually immature and is effectively immortal, but it has different cells, and the cells are
Right.
replaced.
But again, part of what I was talking about again is talking about the post-biological, so that we're going to create systems that are outside of the natural, what would be naturally occurring or autonomously occurring through natural processes. And at that point, all bets are off in terms of the life expectancy of any given post-biological organism or intellect or what have you.
But like what chemical composition or solution stays together forever? Or what,
Nothing will.
Like what,
I mean, nothing ever will. I mean,
what kind of atoms have a radioactive decay that's forever?
I'm not.
They just don't.
Believe me, I'm not going to. I'm not here saying that the universe is immortal. The universe is going to come to a bad end, and we're facing our own facing our own mortality as a consequence. You have philosophers, even metaphysicians like Barrow and Tipler, who are trying to come up with schemes for immortality. I think that's all kind of fancy, philosophizing and kind of trying to force the conclusion based on what wishful thinking and projecting what they would like to see happen. But ultimately, I think that all life in this universe will cease to exist at some point. I'm not making any harbor no illusions about that.
Yeah, so like rather than just saying human life indefinitely, you can say multiply it by many, many times exponentially,
Sure.
but not indefinitely.
Point well taken.
Oh, and I read the Wisdom of Repugnance. That was hilarious. People breeding with cloning.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
The Enlightenment produced scientists that were optimists and confident. Today, the result is we've had thousands of people slaughtered by atomic bombs and global warming.
Yes.
People are very concerned about where science is taking us. Now, from what you said, if we combine artificial intelligence with biology, perhaps we can solve a lot of the human problems. But one can argue against this and say, but wait a minute, it's, if I can put it this way, the caveman brain that is programming these artificial intelligence. And I'm not sure you can program value.
I think what you're talking about is the problem of what's known as the singularity. Is that a term that's familiar to you?
I'm sorry?
Have you heard the term singularity or the technological singularity? That's essentially what you're describing, whether you know it or not.
I'm questioning the ethics
Yes,
of
there is a
what the
Yes.
progress that you're suggesting.
I'll answer your question one of two ways. One is I actually very much in agreement with you. I think that our technologies are heading in a place now that's very frightening. And we had our first apocalyptic piece of technology developed in the 1940s via the Manhattan Project. And by the way, we had devoted an entire discussion from the TTA just last week on this exact topic, which is human extinction and the threat thereof. And there are a growing number of risks that are emerging, nanotechnology being actually the most severe of them. That nanotechnology could be used in such a malign way, what's called molecular assembling nanotechnology run amok, whether it be used as a weapon or just an accident, could actually consume all matter of the planet, whether it be the atmosphere or the mass of the matter itself. And also other threats are that of a deliberately engineered pathogen that could wipe out a significant portion of humanity. And there are a number of thinkers out there who have tried to, I guess, formulate our chances of surviving this century. You have thinkers like even Stephen Hawking, Sir Martin Rees, the philosopher Nick Bostrom, some heavy hitters who have actually posed some pretty pessimistic figures in terms of us being able to survive the next generation of apocalyptic technology. So to that end, I mean, there are a number of groups that have emerged in and around the transhumanist community, like the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. That's one of our mandates, is dealing with catastrophic risks and risk mitigation and foresight activities. There is the Center of Responsible Nanotechnology and the Foresight Institute, and there's also the Lifeboat Foundation that has emerged to try to work to alleviate some of the threats that are coming from pending technologies. Second way I would like to answer your question is you were talking about the onset of a very poor, which I think what you really are describing as a poorly programmed artificial intelligence that can do a lot of damage. That is what's called the singularity, by the way. And some of you might know that term. It's a term that's been used since Werner Vinci coined it back about 15 years ago or so. The singularity is a hypothesized point in the human future that we actually don't know what's going to happen afterwards, which is why it's called a singularity. It's taken from the term in physics, meaning it's an event horizon. In physics, it's an event horizon that describes where light can no longer...
It's not the same thing. I'm sorry.
You're welcome to interject afterwards. That light can no longer... there comes a point at a black hole where light can no longer escape its gravitational pull, so we can't see beyond that pull. At that point, it's called an event horizon. Where it's applied in human society is that we will develop artificial intelligence that will exceed human capacity by an order of magnitude. Not just like 10 times more powerful than human cognition, but thousands to millions of times more powerful.
But the question is still a caveman brain.
Yes, the question is what will be the constitution of that artificial intelligence? The theory again here is that with such an intelligence in place, it would be able to execute on any goal that it is given. So
the ones that he perceives.
The ones that he perceives or misunderstands. And there's a common...
but there's always this element that we can't foresee the
correct.
future.
That's correct. It is, again, it's called a social event horizon known as the singularity. It's hypothesized to happen, again, thinkers like Kurzweil and Moravec predicted in around 50 years from now. And for some reason, everything kind of seems to come together around 2050 in terms of projections, between 2045 and 50. That this is the moment that this will happen. We have absolutely no clue what will happen afterwards, whether it be human extinction, whether it be something miraculous, whether it be a whole paradigmatic shift, we don't know. But the concern is that it will be poorly programmed, much like you're suggesting, much to our disadvantage.
What I've been arguing against is exactly what you're showing in your optimism, and it's not warranted.
Again, the alternative is to perhaps talk about relinquishment then, and technological relinquishment, which is stopping the advancement of technology altogether, which is another form of risk altogether. That the idea that we should return to some kind of stasis in terms of our technological sophistication would actually probably bring about a similar fate anyways, and that you're also shirking a lot of the benefits that I was putting forward earlier.
I'm not suggesting you're wrong, I'm just saying that it's an apprehension that everyone or many people have.
Believe me, I harbor no illusions about what awaits us in the future. At the same time, I'm going to promote, I think, what will be to our benefit and how we can apply them to our benefit.
I'm all in favor of progress, but it's always an unknown and unknown.
And again, you know what? As you stand across me, by all means, give me some action steps. What do we do? Give me some hard answers as to what we do at this point. What projects do we forego? How do we forego them? How do we enforce that?
I think there's a lot of problems that exist in our society without going in the direction that you say that we can go. And I'm sure we can go. But there's a lot of problems and a lot of effort should be put into solving the immediate problems. As it is now, we have highly sophisticated elements in our society in the West, and yet there are millions of people and children are starving and dying. Why don't we tackle that?
What makes you suppose that what I've talked about doesn't address those problems?
Sorry?
What makes you think that anything I discussed today would not help to address those problems?
Because it's
we can if we take an effort, if we make an effort to do so.
The fellow who developed the Segway and is currently working on the most advanced prosthetic arm right now for DARPA.
Oh, that's okay.
Has developed also a device that will turn any liquid into potable water.
Yeah,
and that's going to be distributed in Africa in short order. I mean, that's technological advancement. I mean, you can take literally any liquid, even toxic liquid, and convert it into potable water. And there's also a great quote from Bruce Sterling who said, you know, the future is here. The future is here, it just hasn't been distributed yet. So these are issues as well when it comes to starvation. I mean, they're talking about rising food prices and people starving and all that. Meanwhile, you go back to the Dominion or Sobeys and you see them throwing out groceries at a horrific rate. Everyone knows it. I've seen it. It's to think that this is a problem of human technology is absolutely misguided. It's an issue of distribution. It's an issue of skewed priorities. And definitely, if this is something that concerns you, well, vote appropriately during the next election.
Oh, hi. That was a long line to get here. So I have somewhat of a multifaceted comment, so wait till you hear the full thing. The latter part, I'm not necessarily arguing, but I'll pose it anyway. So it'll start off by picking off on a small thing you mentioned, something about eugenics in China and that being involved with what you term Marxian ideology. So the first part deals with, I'm not sure what exactly you would mean by that, because you can't, there's no biological component to a proletariat that you would eugenically create. So going off from that, my second point, kind of position, not necessarily position, would be the idea that ironically, that arguing against this, your whole ideas of historical inevitability actually mimic the most vulgar aspects of Marxism itself. And because you keep talking about how these things will necessarily come about and you can't fight history, that was a very terrible interpretation of Marx by some people who took it that way. And if, for example, I give you the case of stem cells. So you said, believe the hype. There isn't necessarily anything productive that will come from it. There's a whole bunch of technology. There is promise in some stem cells. I'm not saying that, but I doubt any scientist would say believe the hype in that kind of sense. And just kind of selling it to people, saying this will necessarily cure things.
It's an interesting concern. I don't think I'm not that familiar with the objections or where the scientific establishment is concerned that there are limitations to stem cell research. If you actually have articles that you can direct to my attention, I would very much like to see them.
Well,
take a look at them.
Like the iPS cells that were created, the induced ones. There was a lot of hype over that, but they're absolutely useless for treatment. Like you can't use them.
And again, there very well may be hurdles that we haven't seen, that we haven't foreseen. Again, I'm not going to deny that either. But I think that to deny the potential for stem cells outright is perhaps misguided, because there's actually stuff that's actually really happening. It actually really is being applied in laboratory settings today. Back to your earlier question, one of my favorite subjects is political theory, and Marxist ideology, and again, is not necessarily a static entity. It's something that is reinterpreted over time as it pertains to particular civilization or particular, group that imposes communism at any given time. Reinterpreting it much like Christians would reinterpret the Bible to kind of fit their particular context. But Marx was absolutely about human improvement and human advancement, and I don't think he made any distinction between biological intervention and social intervention. Most certainly he was concerned with social engineering. That's really what Marxism is. The whole idea of a totalitarian ideology is to have one way of thinking imposed upon the entire population such that they work in concert together for a desired end. And he also talked, though, how it was very much technophilic and very much in tune with the idea of perpetual progress in the technologies for the advancement of social well-being, and again, such to the end that you talked about the perfect workers' paradise and all that nonsense. But what he did talk about quite explicitly, though, was the emergence of the new man, the quote-unquote communist new man, which is a new man that's at a different order than the man that emerged prior to this communist utopia. Where the Chinese have taken this, and again, this is no secret, they openly talk about the creation of the new man. For example, you know what the Chinese do? They have these vans that go around from village to village, and they quickly round up the villagers, and they quickly suss them out, their physical attributes, who looks healthy, who doesn't, who should procreate, who should not. Obviously, if you're disabled or they've got something about them that they don't like, you cannot reproduce. I mean, that's as eugenic as it gets, but that's also very consistent with communist philosophy, that the state can actually move in and impact on the future state of its population. So there is no inconsistency there. And there was a second part of your question about Marxian.
Your ideas of historical
determinism. Yeah, I will admit that a certain part of my philosophical framework comes from a certain amount of technological determinism. I think this idea that we are 100% in control of our destiny is really misguided. I really hear it so often, and it really kind of, I wonder, where does that come from? where do we have this arrogance in thinking that we are 100% in control of our destiny? And I don't know where the answer is. Perhaps we want to feel that we have that modicum of control over our future. But we certainly, for the most part, while we have a certain amount of control in our local and immediate lives and our immediate circumstances, that from a macro perspective, where we are headed, where the trajectory is headed for intelligences is beyond our control. So in that sense, I'm very much a determinist, a technological determinist. And I may lose many of you at this point, and certainly a lot of my peers I lose at this point, but it's something I wholeheartedly believe in. And then you can get into sociobiological discourse at this point and understand trends in human society. I recommend anything by E.O. Wilson, Jared Diamond, even Robert Wright's Non-Zero, to show that there are certain tendencies and trajectories that human civilization are following, both in terms of our technological development, our development of our communications technologies, and so on and so forth. That, for example, things like monarchism as it emerged into democracies, who knows what it'll emerge to in the future, are also very much not something that came about through choice, but came about through the need for us to politically organize ourselves given certain contexts where we are historically. So that's a long-winded way of trying to answer your question.
So just to finish up, a citation for where Marx would support the new man being biologically engineered by eugenics. And
again, maybe not explicitly in those words, but it would have no compunction. Well, let me put it this way. The Soviets were working on, the Soviets back in the 30s, I believe, were working on trying to develop a ape-human hybrid, some kind of a chimera. They were absolutely serious. They were actually engaging in this research.
We have things like that in labs. That's not.
Well, I certainly hope we don't have things like that in labs. But we have certainly other transgenic organisms, things like ghosts that secrete spider silk in their milk and so on. That's transgenics for sure. But the idea there was to create a new kind of a race, a new kind of a species that could be exploited and subjugated in a certain way. But again, the idea that nature, Marx once said that nature has no price, and it's very similar to what the Bible says about us having dominion over nature, is that we can do with it whatever we wish. And I think that Marxist ideology says that we can take nature and do whatever we wish with it so long as it fulfills the ideology of fulfilling the proletariat's journey into an industrial utopia.
That sounds kind of like you, though. To begin.
I'm by no means am I any kind of utopian. Where did you get any sense of utopianism in mind? Again,
all these promises you call utopian?
Well, the promises.
You
can. One, perhaps from the perspective, let's say, of a person living in the 15th century, if we would describe today's civilization, they'd say that, oh, you're being utopian, driving around in cars and being vaccinated and living to 80 years old. It's an issue of relativity.
Looking forward to a classless society. Every argument you said has a parallel in
And
Marx.
again, Marx, like Hegel before him, talked about the end of history. I'm not talking about the end of history. I'm talking about perpetual progress, much like Condorcet was talking about.
Well, in a sense, your singularity has a very striking similarity to Marx's idea that you can't see beyond your confined economic framework. And once you get to that classless revolution, he didn't write much on that.
And again, if
that has a parallel.
If human extinction is considered utopian in your mind as a post-singularity outcome, then I'm not following your point. I'm not about to make any speculation about what exists after the singularity.
Neither was Marx. Most of his writing on Das Kapital was critique of capitalism. He gave the same airy kind of hand-waving explanations.
Well, I don't think I agree. I think that he very much painted a very specific picture of utopian worker society, where there was no, again, all complete collectivism, again, no authoritarian presence in place, and that it was just kind of this happy-go-lucky.
And that was pretty much it. Aside from that very two-sentence explanation, there was nothing. Same with your singularity idea.
I don't see what, I'm sorry, I don't see the analogy.
Okay.
Okay.
If transhumanism is one day possible, do you think the selection process will and should be applied to it? For example, if transhumanism is one day possible, do you think a selection process will and should be applied to it? For instance, a lot of geographers feel that the Earth is now no longer salvageable, and actually by the year 2050, it won't be possible for human life to exist.
Yes.
Let's create a scenario where it's possible to develop the technology by that point to live on Mars. Now, Nietzsche believed in the Superman. Do you think only the Superman should have his life extended and live on Mars?
A couple of issues there. One is, again, I think what you're suggesting as well is that there will be somewhat of a speciation happening, a diversity of form, that you will have, of course, some humans that will continue to remain as natural humans, while others will modify themselves, change themselves, to perhaps a point where they're radically far removed from their natural state of being, so that you'll have this real disparate space between, persons on the planet. And should one have rights over Trump? Should one have Trump the rights over the other? Who has access to? And that's that's a fair question. And one of the things that we are working at from a foresight perspective, particularly the IEET, is to establish, again, the kinds of arrangements that may exist between post-human and regular human society, issues as they pertain to a personhood spectrum, so who would still qualify under the body of protection of rights and freedoms and so on. And you're already starting to see some of this today, for example, with the Great Ape Project, whereas countries like New Zealand, Austria, and Spain have put forth bills. They're going to die, but it's a precursor to something bigger, where they'd like to see the great apes being endowed with personhood status, where they would apply under certain charters of rights and freedoms, probably UN-based, to prevent them from being abused, from being held in captivity, from being in, or at least in cages that are of a specific size. You can never torture an animal like that and so forth, because they would be recognized as persons. And again, we're not talking about recognizing them such that they're citizens that they could go out and vote in the next election and put in an application for a credit card. It is simply something where they have been assigned protections. So I think now, if I can somehow spin that to your concern, is that when it comes to issues of accessibility, issues of discrimination, segregation, that it's going to come down to the potency of our legal system and the will behind our abilities to enforce it, to make sure that equity does happen, that social justice continues to happen. Your point about who can colonize Mars and who can't, who can only be the enhanced, well, again, that's an open question. I have no idea what the answer to that will be.
Okay, let's say there's a massive population of transhumanism that exists right now, but there's only enough technology or resources to use it on 1,000 people. What would happen, do you think?
I'm not sure by that particular scenario.
I mean, let's say so many people want their life extended right now. We have to make a selection process. Some people may be very angry.
Yeah, I think, again, initially you will have a chosen few for whatever twist of fate, maybe social status, financial status, that they will have access to it. And again, you're fearing, though, that because of resource limitations, that's all there is, there ain't no more. We're sorry, rest of humanity, you can't experience any of the benefits that we've achieved. I'm sorry, it's not a scenario that I thought.
George, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt.
Okay, sorry.
We really need to start cutting it off, so maybe there's 3 people in line, and
Okay.
one question each, one short question,
Okay.
and let's look answer.
Okay, I'll try.
And that's it,
Okay.
thanks.
I just wanted to say that despite my criticism, a number of criticisms, I thought that was a really excellent presentation.
Well, thank you.
And I hope you'll come back sometime so that...
Well, after this Q&A, I hope you'll invite me back.
And regarding the singularity,
sure.
I'm reminded of an early computer joke, and that is that when the ultimate computer was constructed, the chief programmer was given the honor of submitting the first question to it. And he wrote down the question, stuck it in the slot. And the question was, is there a God? And from the height of the machine, a lightning bolt came down, fused the controls, and the deep voice said, now there is.
Yes. And in fact, I'll say 2 things about that. The analogy is apropos, and this has led to a lot of ill will against those who put forth the idea of the singularity, that they're actually taught, because they actually talk about it, that this will be an intellect, an order of magnitude so above human intellect that it would actually, the only word we can use to describe it is godlike. That'll be that much beyond where we're at. And that's where, again, you lose a lot of people in the conversation because they don't want to hear the word God or that anything can exist on this planet, that we're so arrogant, we're so intelligent, we're so in control of the situation. To suddenly be usurped by something that's godlike is actually quite frightening, but that is part of the whole problem of what is the singularity. And just one quick thing, speaking of jokes, it's kind of a dark joke, but it's a good joke because it actually helps illuminate the problem of understanding why the singularity is a problem. And again, I was mentioning earlier that an AI, by definition, powerful enough, can execute on any goal that it is given. We talked about this when you were up at the microphone. So by analogy, let's say that just on a whimsy here, suggests that the first company that ever develops what's called artificial superintelligence is a paperclip manufacturer. And of course, what is a paperclip manufacturer concerned about? It's concerned about the very efficient